If you grew up in the 1960s, Saturday morning meant one thing: adventure. While other cartoons relied on talking animals and simple plots, there was one show that took you to real locations around the world, mixed genuine science fiction with real history, and treated its young audience like they could actually understand complex ideas. That show was unlike anything else on television. For decades, people have watched it, loved it, and passed it on to their kids. But most people don't know the incredible stories behind how it was made, why it looked so different from every other cartoon, and what made it such a groundbreaking achievement. Today, we're uncovering 10 mind-blowing facts about Jonny Quest from 1964. Fact 10, it revolutionized animation using a technique nobody had tried before. Jonny Quest premiered on September 18, 1964, on ABC. But what made it stand out immediately was how it looked. While most cartoons at the time used full animation, meaning every frame was drawn from scratch, Jonny Quest used a technique called limited animation combined with something revolutionary: rotoscoping and traced photographs. The show's creator, Joe Ruby, and producer Doug Wildey realized that creating a fully animated series every single week was impossibly expensive and time-consuming. So they innovated. They used photographs of real locations around the world and traced over them. They created detailed painted backgrounds of actual places: Egypt, the Amazon, Japan. When characters moved through these environments, the background stayed the same, while only the characters animated. This wasn't lazy animation. It was the most efficient way to create a show that looked cinematic and real. The technique saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in production costs. It also made the show look different from everything else. The backgrounds had actual geographic accuracy and detail because they were literally based on photographs. Characters would move through real-world environments that had been carefully researched and rendered. This gave Jonny Quest a sense of authenticity that other cartoons couldn't match. Fact 9. The show was inspired by real explorers and real adventures. Jonny Quest wasn't created in a vacuum. It was heavily inspired by real-world adventure stories and explorers. The premise of a young boy traveling the world with his father, a scientist, was loosely based on accounts of actual expeditions and explorer families who took their children on research journeys. The show's writers did extensive research. They consulted with scientists, explorers, and military advisors to make sure the adventures had a basis in reality or plausibility. When Jonny went to search for a lost civilization, the mythology and geography were researched. When he encountered fictional dangers, they were often based on real environmental hazards or real animals. The Amazon episodes featured real jungle dangers. The Arctic episodes featured real Arctic survival challenges. The creators weren't just making things up, they were creating fictional adventures that could plausibly happen in real places with real hazards. This approach to storytelling, mixing real locations with fictional adventures, was relatively new to television. Most adventure shows were either purely fictional or purely documentary. Jonny Quest split the difference. It felt educational because it was set in real places and dealt with real scientific concepts, but it was entertainment because the specific adventures were fictional. This hybrid approach appealed to both children and parents, who appreciated that their kids were learning about the world while being entertained. Fact 8. The voice acting was recorded by Hollywood legends. The voice cast of Jonny Quest included actors who were already established in Hollywood. Mike Road, who voiced Jonny Quest, was a working actor with substantial credits. But what made the voice casting particularly interesting was that the producers went after established voice actors and character actors rather than unknowns. Roger Conlon, Tim Matheson, though early in his career, voiced Haji. He would go on to have a significant career in television and film. The character voices were performed by professional actors who understood pacing, timing, and character development. This elevated the voice work above what was typical for cartoons at the time. Many cartoons used less experienced or cheaper voice actors. Jonny Quest invested in real talent. The voice recording sessions were done in the style of old-time radio dramas. The entire cast would gather in a studio, and the scenes would be recorded with all the characters present, speaking their lines together. This created natural timing and interaction between characters. It wasn't done with individual actors recording their lines separately. The chemistry and timing that resulted from having actors in the same room performing together gave the dialogue a natural flow that you could hear in the final product. Fact 7. Only 26 episodes were made in the first season, but it became a cultural phenomenon. Jonny Quest's first season consisted of exactly 26 episodes in network television. This was a typical full season in 1964. But despite only having 24 episodes, the show became a massive cultural phenomenon kids across America watched faithfully every Saturday morning. Families set their schedules around the show. The show's success was somewhat unexpected. ABC was taking a risk with it. The concept was different. The animation style was different. The content was more complex than typical cartoon fare. But audiences embraced it immediately. Kids loved the adventures, the exotic locations, and the sense that they were seeing real places. Parents appreciated the educational value and the quality of the writing. The show became popular enough that merchandise followed quickly. Jonny Quest action figures were released. Comic books tied to the show were published. The character entered the popular culture consciousness in ways that most cartoons never did. Children who watched in 1964 have memories of the show decades later. Many consider it one of the highlights of Saturday morning television. Fact 6. The show featured cutting-edge technology that was science fiction at the time. Part of what made Jonny Quest feel futuristic was the technology featured in the show. Race Bannon, Johnny's bodyguard and father figure, had access to equipment and vehicles that seemed incredibly advanced for 1964. The Quest compound featured technology that was genuinely ahead of its time. Video communication systems, advanced laboratory equipment, surveillance devices. The Quest team traveled in a sleek jet boat called the Quester. They had a flying device that looked like something out of a science fiction film. Some of the technology shown in the series was actually based on real military and scientific equipment that was being developed in 1964, but not yet available to the general public. The creators consulted with technology advisors to make sure the fictional technology wasn't completely implausible. They extrapolated from real developments to create technology that could plausibly exist. For instance, the video communication systems shown in some episodes were inspired by research into video phones that scientists were actually working on at that time. This approach made the show feel more sophisticated to adult viewers than typical cartoons. Parents watching with their children could see that the technology, while fantastic, wasn't entirely impossible. It was based on real advancements. This gave the show a believability factor that enhanced the adventure stories. You could imagine these expeditions being conducted with this kind of technology. The Quest family wasn't presented as having access to magic or pure fantasy. They had access to advanced but plausible technology. This made the entire premise more credible. What's fascinating is that some of the technology that seemed purely fictional in 1964 has actually become reality. Video communication systems, GPS-like tracking devices, drone-like vehicles, all things shown or implied in Jonny Quest, are now everyday technology. The show's creators weren't just imagining random futuristic concepts. They were imagining logical extensions of technology that was actually being developed. In many cases, they weren't wrong about where technology was headed. They were just seeing the future more clearly than most. Fact 5. The show was one of the first cartoons to take its antagonists seriously. Unlike many cartoons of the era where villains were cartoonish and obviously evil, Jonny Quest often featured antagonists with motivations that made sense within the story. Some of the bad guys in various episodes had legitimate goals, even if their methods were questionable. Some had scientific motivations. Some were driven by greed or power, but they weren't comedic in their evil. They weren't twirling mustaches or cackling with unhinged laughter. They were people with purposes. This added a layer of sophistication to the show. Children watching weren't presented with simple good versus evil narratives where the villain was obviously wrong. Sometimes the antagonist's goals were understandable. even if their methods were unethical. This forced the young viewer to think more complexly about motivation and morality. A viewer had to consider why someone was doing something bad, not just accept that they were bad. In some episodes, the quest team had to deal with people who weren't necessarily evil in their hearts, but were making wrong choices. The show also didn't shy away from actual danger. When the quest team was threatened, the threat was real, within the context of the story. There wasn't a sense that everything would work out perfectly because it was a cartoon. Sometimes missions failed. Sometimes the team was cornered or injured. This created genuine tension in episodes. Children knew that bad things could actually happen to the characters they cared about. Character relationships mattered. When Jonny or Race or Dr. Quest was in danger, it felt like genuine danger because the show had established that bad outcomes were possible. This approach to storytelling elevated Jonny Quest beyond typical cartoon fare. It treated the audience's intelligence seriously. It assumed children could handle complexity and moral ambiguity. It proved that cartoons didn't have to resort to slapstick or simple narratives to entertain young viewers. Intelligent storytelling worked. Serious antagonists with real motivations worked. Stakes that felt real worked. Fact 4. Doug Wildey, the show's creator, was a legendary character designer. Doug Wildey wasn't just the creator of Jonny Quest. He was an accomplished artist and character designer who had worked in animation for years before the show. His design philosophy for Jonny Quest was distinctive and influential. He created characters that were simple enough to animate within budget constraints, but detailed enough to be engaging and memorable. This balance between simplicity and distinctiveness is harder to achieve than it appears. The design of the characters, Jonny's distinctive haircut, Race Bannon's muscular physique, Haji's exotic appearance, Bandit the dog, all came from Wildey's design sensibilities. These weren't generic cartoon characters. They were distinctive, recognizable, and instantly memorable. Kids could draw Jonny Quest characters more easily than many other cartoon characters because the designs were so clean and distinctive. The characters had personality built into their physical design. You could understand who they were just by looking at them. Wildey's influence extended beyond character design. He oversaw the overall visual aesthetic of the show, the backgrounds, the environments, the way the show looked overall bore his artistic stamp. His background in commercial art and animation gave him a sophistication in visual communication that made the show look more polished and professional than many cartoons. He understood composition, color theory, and visual storytelling at a level that most cartoon designers didn't possess. Wildey's legacy in animation is substantial. Before Jonny Quest, he had worked on various animation projects. After Jonny Quest became successful, his work and reputation elevated the entire field of animated television. He proved that cartoons could be art, not just cheap entertainment. His design sense influenced how other animated series approached character and environment design. Animation studios that wanted to create quality animated programs looked to Wildey's work as a reference point for what was possible. What makes Wildey's achievement even more impressive is that he was doing all this work under production constraints and budgets. He wasn't working with unlimited resources. He was working within the limitations of television animation production in 1964. Within those constraints, he created something that looked professional and polished. He made every frame count. He made every design choice matter. This is the mark of a true artist, creating quality work within limitations. Fact 3. The show was filmed in color when most cartoons were still in black and white. This is a detail that gets overlooked in discussions of the show, but it was significant. Jonny Quest was produced in color in 1964. Television broadcasting was still transitioning to color. Most programs were in black and white. Most cartoons, which were cheaper to produce, were definitely in black and white. Color television sets were still relatively rare in American homes. According to Nielsen ratings data from 1964, only about 13% of American households had color television sets. Jonny Quest's commitment to color production was an expensive choice. It meant the production costs were higher than typical cartoon productions. But the decision paid off. The color brought the exotic locations to life in ways that black and white couldn't. The jungles could actually look like jungles. The deserts could look golden, the oceans could look blue. When the Quest team traveled to Egypt or the Amazon or Japan, the color communicated those locations viscerally. You could feel the heat of the desert, see the density of the jungle, sense the unfamiliar landscapes through color. This investment in color production spoke to the creators' commitment to quality. They weren't cutting corners. They were investing in making the show look as good as possible. For viewers who had color televisions, still a luxury item in 1964, the show was stunning. It was like watching an adventure film on Saturday morning, not a cartoon. Even for viewers with black and white sets, the production quality was evident. The show looked more professional and more expensive than other cartoons. There was a polish and a professionalism to Jonny Quest that couldn't be missed. The decision to produce in color also meant that the show had longevity. As color television sets became more common, Jonny Quest aged better than cartoons that had been produced in black and white. When networks began rerunning cartoons in the late 1960s and 1970s, Jonny Quest looked contemporary because it was in color. This gave the show a longer life in syndication and made it more attractive to stations and to audiences. A show that had been forward-thinking enough to produce in color in 1964 remained visually appealing for decades. That's an investment in the future that paid dividends over time. Fact 2. The show's music was composed by a legendary television composer. The iconic Jonny Quest theme was composed by Hoyt Curtin. One of the most prolific and respected television composers of the era, Curtin had previously worked on animated shows like The Flintstones and The Jetsons. His work on those shows had established him as a talented composer capable of creating memorable, distinctive themes. Curtin understood that a theme song wasn't just background music. It was a statement about what a show was, what tone it set, and what audiences should expect. The Jonny Quest theme is instantly recognizable. The distinctive guitar riff, the energetic orchestration, the sense of adventure in the music, all of this came from Curtin's composition. The theme perfectly captured the adventurous spirit of the show. It was exciting without being cartoonish. It was modern for 1964, incorporating guitar-based rock elements alongside traditional orchestral instruments. That combination of rock guitar with orchestral sounds was relatively innovative for television music in 1964. Most television shows used purely orchestral themes. Curtin's incorporation of guitar gave Jonny Quest a contemporary, almost rebellious feel. Curtin's work on the background music throughout the series was equally impressive. He created underscore that enhanced the adventure without overwhelming the dialogue or the action. The music made tense scenes more tense, made exotic locations feel exotic, and made humor land effectively. His compositional work was professional grade, the kind of music you'd hear in a live-action film, not a Saturday morning cartoon. He understood pacing and emotional timing. He knew when to swell the music for emphasis and when to pull back to let dialogue breathe. This sophistication in musical composition elevated the entire show. What's particularly noteworthy is that Curtin composed original music for virtually every scene in every episode. He didn't rely on repeated musical cues or a limited library of stock music. He created a diverse musical palette that fit each episode's specific story and location. An episode set in the Arctic had different music than an episode set in the jungle. A tense confrontation had different music than a scene of discovery. This level of compositional variation required both talent and extensive work. Curtin was essentially composing like a film composer, creating original music for each sequence. Hoyt, Curtin's influence on television music extended far beyond Jonny Quest. His work proved that animated television could have music of genuine quality and sophistication. He set a standard for what animated series music could be. Composers who came after Curtin looked to his work as a reference point. His combination of rock and orchestra elements became influential in television and film scoring. He showed that you could be modern and sophisticated simultaneously. You could use contemporary instruments and sounds while maintaining musical integrity. Curtin's legacy is that he elevated the entire field of television music composition through his work on animated series. Fact 1. The show created a template that influenced adventure television for decades. Jonny Quest's influence on television lasted far longer than the original series. The show demonstrated that audiences wanted intelligent, well-produced adventure programming. It showed that cartoons didn't have to be dumbed down. It proved that you could create a program that appealed to children while also engaging adults. In the years after Jonny Quest premiered, networks invested in more adventure-oriented cartoons with higher production values. Shows that followed either copied the Jonny Quest formula directly or were influenced by its approach. The combination of real locations, fictional adventure, scientific elements, and character-driven storytelling became a template that other shows tried to replicate. The influence extended beyond just television. Comic books adapted the formula. Adventure novels borrowed from the approach. The whole genre of adventure entertainment was shaped, at least partially, by what Jonny Quest proved could work. It established that young audiences could handle complex plots, real-world locations, and sophisticated storytelling. This didn't just change television in 1964, it helped establish what animation and adventure television could be. Jonny Quest stands as one of the most important animated series in television history. It wasn't just a collection of entertaining adventure stories. It was a technical innovation, a storytelling breakthrough, and a cultural milestone. The people who created it, from Joe Ruby and Doug Wildey to Hoyt Curtin to the voice actors and animators, were pushing the boundaries of what television animation could be. They proved that cartoons could look sophisticated, tell intelligent stories, and engage audiences across age groups. For viewers who watched it in 1964, Jonny Quest was something special. It felt different from other cartoons. It looked better, sounded better, and told more interesting stories. The exotic locations were fascinating. The adventures were thrilling. The characters were engaging. Those who grew up with the show carry those memories with them decades later. Today, when we look back at Jonny Quest, we're looking at more than just a nostalgia artifact. We're looking at a show that genuinely changed television. It set standards for animation production, demonstrated the commercial viability of quality children's programming, and influenced the direction of adventure entertainment for decades to come. The show deserves recognition not just as something we enjoyed watching, but as something that mattered in the history of television. If you enjoyed exploring these facts about Jonny Quest and Saturday morning television history, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We create in-depth content about classic television, animation history, and the shows that shaped our childhood. Subscribe so you don't miss future videos about the programs and creators that made Saturday morning special. Thank you for watching.